Do you believe in miracles? Because that late afternoon, in the middle of the most lavish charity gala in Chicago, a barefoot woman in rumpled clothes, her hair wild and tangled, led her gaunt 5-year-old daughter straight up to the most notorious Mafia boss in the city, Kieran Blackwood, the king of darkness, the man who made the entire underworld tremble. But in that moment, he was only a desperate father, pushing a wheelchair that carried his 7-year-old son, a boy who could no longer walk, could no longer speak, could no longer smile, ever since the day he watched his mother get shot to death right in front of him. 14 months, millions of dollars, the best doctors in the United States. Nothing could reach the child sinking into the dark. And then that ragged woman dropped to her knees, lifted her face, met Kieran's eyes without flinching, and said, "Let my daughter dance with your son. I'll make the boy walk again." He didn't believe her. He was furious. He thought she was just another street con artist trying to feed on his grief. But then he saw something he hadn't seen in 14 months. His son was looking at the 5-year-old girl. Truly looking. Those empty eyes blinked. The boy's head turned, just slightly, toward the child dancing barefoot on the grass. For the first time in all that time, something stirred back to life inside the deadened gaze of Owen Blackwood. And what none of them knew, not the cold Mafia boss, not the single mother on the run, not the 5-year-old girl who had never once had enough to eat, and not the 7-year-old boy who had forgotten how to take a step, was that a miracle was about to happen. A miracle that would change all of their lives forever. If you want to know what that miracle is, please like this video to support the channel, share this story with anyone who needs healing, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next moving stories. That night, after the gala, Kieran Blackwood sat alone in his pitch-dark office, the only light coming from the desk lamp, casting a narrow glow over a face worn thin with exhaustion. In his hand was a photograph he'd stared at thousands of times over the past 14 months. A picture of Owen laughing, the bright, careless laughter of a 6-year-old boy, the last photograph taken before tragedy struck. He traced his son's face through the cold glass, and his mind slid back to this afternoon, to the moment Owen's vacant eyes had suddenly blinked, to the slight turn of that small head toward the 5-year-old girl dancing barefoot on the grass. For the first time in 14 months of hell, Kieran had seen the faintest glimmer of hope, but he didn't dare believe it. He'd hoped too many times, been disappointed too many times, hired dozens of the finest doctors, spent millions of dollars, only to be met again and again with the same helpless shake of the head. He lifted the phone, his voice steel cold as he gave an order to Ronan, his most loyal right hand. Investigate that woman. Everything. From the moment she was born to the second she showed up at the gala today. I want to know it all. While he waited, memory dragged Kieran back to the fateful night 14 months earlier, the night his life changed forever. Catherine Blackwood, his wife, a beautiful woman with sun-gold hair and a gentle smile, had been the only light in his dark world of blood and guns. She knew who he was, knew what he did, and still she loved him. Still she believed that somewhere inside the heart of the King of Darkness, there remained a small corner meant for love and family. That afternoon, Catherine picked Owen up from school like she did on any ordinary day. She drove the familiar black SUV, Owen in the back seat with his backpack on his shoulders, chattering about the drawing he'd made in class. Everything was so peaceful it hurt. Then Dracos's car appeared, blocking the road right in front of the school gate, in broad daylight, surrounded by innocent children and parents waiting for their own kids. 3 shots rang out. Catherine fell, blood spreading across her pure white blouse, her blue eyes wide as she looked at her son one last time before the light inside them went out. Owen, 6 years old, saw everything. He threw himself out of the car, wrapped his arms around his mother, his tiny hands trying to press against the wound that wouldn't stop bleeding, his mouth screaming for her in raw, desperate terror. "Mom, wake up. Mom, don't sleep. Mom, Mom, Mom." But Catherine never opened her eyes again. When Kieran arrived, he found his wife already cold, his son covered in blood, and Owen's eyes, those gray eyes identical to his own, staring straight into nothing. The boy didn't cry. He didn't speak. He didn't react when his father pulled him close, didn't react when the ambulance arrived, didn't react when the doctors examined him. From that moment on, Owen Blackwood stopped walking, not because his legs were injured, but because his soul had frozen in that instant of horror, trapped forever in his mother's blood-soaked arms. Kieran held his son on that first night in the hospital and swore to himself he'd find a way to heal Owen, at any cost. Even if he had to burn the whole world down. A knock at the door yanked Kieran back into the present. Ronan stepped in, a thick folder in his hand. "I've got the information, boss." Kieran motioned for him to sit, his cold gray gaze fixed on the pages. Elise Morgan, 27 years old, former ballet dancer with the Boston Ballet Company. Ronan read the report in an even tone, but the details made Kieran's brow lift. There's a warrant out for her. Charge is child abduction, but the child she supposedly abducted is her own biological daughter. The ex-husband is Troy Jennings, a former football player, and he's hunting her down like a madman. She and her daughter have been living on the run for 8 months. No papers, no bank account, no permanent address. Kieran flipped through the file, and Elise Morgan's life rose in front of him like a brutal tragedy, scene by scene. 5 years ago, when she was only 22, Elise Morgan had been a rising star in Boston Ballet. She was cast as Odette in Swan Lake, the role every dancer dreamed of, the peak of a career she'd spent her entire childhood building toward. On opening night, she shone on stage, and out in the audience sat a man handsome and charming, with a smile that could melt hearts. Troy Jennings, a famous former football player, a man who'd once appeared on the covers of sports magazines. They met after the performance, and it was love at first sight. Troy brought flowers, brought gifts, spoke sweetly, treated Elise like a princess. She thought she'd found her prince. She didn't know the prince would turn into a monster. Troy had once been a good man, at least before a spinal injury ended his career. With the spotlight gone, with the easy money gone, with the crowd's admiration gone, Troy began to sink into pain and despair. He became addicted to opioid painkillers to numb the physical agony, then addicted to alcohol to drown the emotional one, then addicted to cocaine just to feel alive. Troy became someone else entirely. Violent, controlling, pathologically jealous. Elise wasn't allowed to see friends, wasn't allowed to speak to male co-workers, wasn't allowed to come home even 5 minutes late. Every time she broke a rule, Troy taught her a lesson with his fists, with a slap, with insults that cut deeper than knives. One night, right before the most important performance of Elise's life, the one that could have made her a prima ballerina, Troy broke her ankle. He stood over her as she lay on the floor, whimpering in pain, and then he smiled coldly and said, "If I don't get to have a career, you don't get to have one either. We're equal, aren't we, my love?" Elise would never dance professionally again. Her ankle healed, but it was never fully the same. Her dream died on that floor that night, along with her belief in love, in men, in life itself. Elise got pregnant with B while she was essentially imprisoned in that house. She gave birth with a bruised eye and broken ribs, lying to the doctors and saying she'd fallen down the stairs. 3 years of hell crawled by, and Elise endured it all for her daughter, because she had no money, nowhere to go, no one to help. Until one night, Troy was drunk, more unhinged than ever, and for the first time he raised his hand to B. Elise lunged in front of her child, took the blow meant for her, and suffered the most brutal beating of her life. But inside her head there was only one thought: run, save my child. That very night, when Troy passed out from the alcohol, Elise scooped B into her arms and fled, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a few coins in her pocket. Troy woke up, realized his wife and daughter were gone, and he did something Elise never saw coming. He kept all her documents, then reported to the police that she'd kidnapped their daughter. Elise became a criminal, unable to exist inside the system, unable to apply for work, unable to rent a home, unable to do anything except live like a ghost on the streets. When Kieran finished the file, he leaned back in his chair, silent and heavy with thought. This wasn't a con artist. This was a victim, a mother running from an abuser, suffering on the streets for 8 months. Nobody did that just to scam money from a mafia boss. And more important than anything, the only thing Kieran truly cared about was that she'd made Owen react. 14 months, millions of dollars, the best doctors. No one had been able to do it. But a barefoot, ragged woman, with a gaunt little girl dancing on the grass, had done it in a matter of minutes. Kieran stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the Chicago night. Find her. Tomorrow morning I want to meet her. Ronan nodded, started to leave, then paused at the door. Boss, what if she refuses? Kieran turned, his gray eyes cold as steel in the darkness. She won't refuse. Everyone has a price. And I always pay in full. Kieran Blackwood didn't believe in miracles. He believed in results. And if this ragged woman could wake his son, he was ready to bargain with anyone, even the devil. Early the next morning, while fog still blanketed the streets of Chicago, Ronan found Elise and Bea in a shadowed alley near Millennium Park, exactly where his street sources had reported. Elise was sitting with her back against damp, mold-stained brick, holding Bea tight against her chest. A flimsy blanket scavenged from a trash bin wrapped around them both, but nowhere near enough to keep out the knife-sharp cold of a late autumn morning. They were trembling, their breaths turning into faint white smoke in the air. Ronan called in the location, and only 15 minutes later, Kieran Blackwood's sleek black car stopped at the mouth of the alley. Kieran stepped out, his perfect black suit without a single crease, his cold gray eyes sweeping over the narrow darkness, before settling on the two figures curled in the corner. Elise woke the instant she heard footsteps. 8 months on the streets had carved survival into her bones, always alert, always ready to run. She sprang up, pulled Bea behind her, her reddish-brown eyes wide, watchful as a cornered animal. She recognized the man in front of her, the Mafia boss she'd risked everything to approach at yesterday's gala, and her heart clenched with fear. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice rough from cold and dehydration, yet still forcing itself into defiance. "I don't have anything for you to take." Kieran looked at her, at the child pressed into her mother's back, at their cracked lips and the pallor of their skin, and then he went straight to the point, without a single detour. "I want you to come live in my house. Your daughter will spend time with my son every day." Elise froze for a heartbeat, then laughed, a dry, brittle sound echoing through the quiet alley. "You think I'm stupid? I know who you are. Kieran Blackwood, Mafia, the most notorious boss in Chicago. What? You expect me to bring my daughter into your den for what?" Kieran didn't look irritated, didn't look surprised. He simply stood there, calm, his gray eyes unblinking on hers. "Yes, I'm everything you said, and that means no one can touch anyone under my protection." He paused, letting the words sink in. No one, not even the law. Silence spread through the alley. Elise understood exactly what he was offering. He could erase the warrant. He could make Troy disappear, literally and figuratively. He could give her and Bea a life she hadn't dared to imagine in the last 8 months. "But what would it cost?" Kieran continued, his voice steady, as if he were reading terms from a business contract. "In exchange, I give you and the girl a place to stay, food, safety. I'll clear every false charge against you. She'll go to school, she'll live like a normal child. All you have to do is help my son." Elise looked down at Bea, her daughter shivering, small hands swollen with red mosquito bites, lips cracked so badly they'd bled from lack of water. Elise had gone 3 days without eating, so she could save what little she found for her child, her stomach twisting with pain, her head spinning with hunger and exhaustion. Bea needed food, clean water, a roof over her head. If this went on, the little girl would die. Not tomorrow, but soon. Winter was coming, and the streets of Chicago showed mercy to no one, least of all a 5-year-old child. Going into a Mafia house made Elise's skin crawl, but as she felt Bea shaking in her arms, she knew she didn't have any other choice. She lifted her chin and met Kieran's gaze, her reddish-brown eyes lit with resolve. "I have conditions." Kieran's brow rose, clearly unused to being given conditions, especially by a woman as vulnerable as she was. But he didn't interrupt, only crossed his arms and waited. Elise drew a deep breath and spoke, her voice firm even as her heart hammered like a drum. "First, no one touches Bea. Anyone. For any reason. If there's a single scratch on my child that isn't from falling down, I'll consider the agreement broken." Kieran nodded. No argument. "Second, if I feel unsafe, I have the right to leave immediately. No explanation, no interference, no one chasing me." Kieran nodded again. "And third," she said, her voice colder now, "I don't need your money. I'm not a prostitute. If you think I'm walking into your bed in exchange for a roof, you picked the wrong woman." Kieran actually flinched at the third condition, and for the first time since he'd arrived, something like real surprise crossed his face. He'd met countless people in his life, and every one of them wanted money from him, one way or another. This was the first time he'd seen someone starving, shaking with cold, desperate enough to follow a Mafia boss, and still refusing money, still insisting on her dignity. "Fine," he said, and his voice shifted. no longer purely cold and mechanical. Anything else? Elise stared straight into his eyes, unblinking, unafraid. No, but if you betray me, I'll find a way to kill you, even if I know I'll die. And then something no one expected happened. Kieran Blackwood laughed. Not a mocking laugh, not a cruel one, but a real laugh, ringing through the dark alley like something out of place. Ronan, standing behind him, jolted, because it was the first time in 14 months he'd heard his boss laugh. You've got nerve, Kieran said when the sound faded, his gray eyes on Elise with something that came close to respect. I like that. We have a deal. An hour later, the black car carried Elise and Bee to the Blackwood estate in the Chicago suburbs, and Elise had to swallow a gasp when she saw it. It wasn't a house. It was a castle, set among rows of ancient oak trees, with towering iron gates, an enormous flower garden, and stone statues standing motionless like silent guards. Bee, for the first time in months, suddenly looked alive. Mom, she breathed, her eyes round with wonder. It's so big. Do princesses live here, Mom? Elise forced back tears, bent down, and kissed the top of her daughter's head. They do, sweetheart. And there's a prince who needs to be awakened. And our job is to help him. They stepped into the main hall, where light spilled down from crystal chandeliers, and an older woman with silver hair pinned into a neat bun was waiting. This is Mrs. Pearl, the housekeeper, Kieran introduced curtly. She'll take care of everything for you and the girl. Mrs. Pearl, a woman of 62 with kind eyes and a warm smile, came forward without the slightest surprise or contempt at Elise's ragged appearance. Welcome to the house, she said gently, as if speaking to family. I'll prepare a room. The little one must be starving. Shall I make breakfast? Bee looked at her, then at her mother, her eyes glittering with hope. Real breakfast, Mom? With bread, Mom? But that warmth didn't last. The sound of heels clicked on the marble staircase, one step at a time, slow, deliberate, heavy with authority. Elise looked up and saw a woman descending, elegant, with platinum hair styled in perfect waves, an expensive dress, and eyes as cold as ice, taking Elise in from head to toe with undisguised contempt. Vivienne Blackwood, Kieran's mother, stopped in front of them, her lips pressed into a hard line. She didn't even bother to look at Elise or Bee, only at her son, her voice sharp enough to cut the air. Kieran, my office, now. It wasn't a request, it was an order. Kieran held his mother's gaze for a moment, then turned to Elise. Wait here. Mrs. Pearl will handle things. He followed his mother into the office, the heavy wooden door slamming shut behind them, but it wasn't thick enough to keep the argument from bleeding through. Elise stood there, holding Bee close, hearing every word like a blade carving into her fragile hope. Have you lost your mind? Vivian's voice rang out, furious. Bringing a street woman into this house? Into the house where Catherine lived? Mother, I know what I'm doing. Kieran's voice remained calm, but there was steel in it now. She has a warrant, Vivienne shouted. She could be Dracos's spy. Have you thought about Owen? Have you thought about this family? Or are you thinking with what's between your legs like every other stupid man? Elise tightened her arms around Bee, feeling the child tremble against her, not knowing whether it was cold or fear. Mrs. Pearl laid a hand on Elise's shoulder, her eyes full of sympathy. Don't worry too much, dear, she murmured. Mrs. Vivian is always like this. But Mr. Kieran won't change his decision. When he decides, no one can move him. Elise nodded, but inside her, unease kept growing. She'd just stepped into a world she didn't understand. A world of power, secrets, enemies hiding in the dark. And she, a woman with nothing but her child and a mother's heart, would have to find a way to survive here. Elise Morgan had just signed a bargain with the devil. She knew it. But between the hell of the streets and the hell of a castle, at least in a castle her daughter would have food, water, a roof over her head, and sometimes that was all a mother needed to keep fighting. On the first day, Mrs. Pearl led Elise to Owen's room on the second floor, the largest room in the children's wing, and Elise had to fight to hide her shock as she stepped inside. The space was immense, lined with expensive toys arranged with careful neatness on shelves, from intricate Lego sets to remote-controlled cars, from sleek modern robots to superhero collections still sealed in their boxes. But everything wore a thin film of dust, proof that no one had touched any of it in a long time. The room held everything a child could ever dream of, and yet it was so cold it raised gooseflesh. No trace of life, no laughter, no marks of a childhood unfolding. Owen sat in his wheelchair beside a wide window, gray eyes identical to his father's fixed on the garden, but not truly seeing anything, his gaze hollow, as if he were staring into another world, a world no one could reach. Elise didn't speak. She only walked in quietly and sat down on the cold wooden floor, a few steps from Owen's chair, not close enough to pressure him, but close enough for him to know someone was there. She didn't look at him directly, didn't try to pull his attention. She simply sat there, as if her presence were the most ordinary thing in the world. Then she began to tell a story, her voice soft, as though she were speaking to herself, as though she didn't need anyone to listen. "There is a ballet called Swan Lake," she began, her eyes turned toward the window in the same direction as Owen's. "It's about a beautiful princess named Odette, cursed by an evil sorcerer to become a swan. By day, she must wear the shape of the bird, white feathers, gliding over a shimmering lake. Only at night, when moonlight falls, can she become human again." Elise paused, letting the story settle into the air. She's terribly lonely because no one recognizes her beneath the swan's feathers. No one knows that inside that bird is a human heart, aching to be loved, aching to be seen. Owen didn't react. He stayed motionless, his eyes still turned toward the garden, as if Elise didn't exist. But she noticed something. He didn't turn away. He didn't swivel his chair to face the wall, didn't shut his eyes, didn't show any sign of refusal. He was allowing her to be there. And for a child who'd kept his heart locked for 14 months, that alone was a step forward. Elise kept going, telling him about Prince Siegfried meeting Odette by the lake, about vows of eternal love, about betrayal and death, about the two lovers finally reunited in heaven. She told the entire ballet, then left in silence, asking for nothing, demanding no response. On the second day, Elise asked Kieran for permission to bring Bea into Owen's room, and he agreed after a brief hesitation. Bea, 5 years old, didn't understand what silence meant, didn't know there were pains so large they made a person forget how to open their mouth. She burst into the room like a small whirlwind, eyes wide as she looked around, talking without pause. "Hi, big brother. You've got so many toys," she blurted, running from shelf to shelf, touching everything with the hungry curiosity of a child who'd never owned expensive toys. "Why don't you play? Are you sad?" "My mom gets sad a lot too. But every time Mom's sad, she dances, and then she isn't sad anymore." "Do you want to watch Bea dance?" Without waiting for an answer, Bea began to dance. Clumsy little movements her mother had taught her. Not following any rules. Just a child happily spinning and bouncing, arms fluttering like butterfly wings. And then the miracle happened. Owen glanced at Bea. Just for an instant, so brief it could have been missed if you weren't watching. But he looked. Those hollow gray eyes shifted slightly toward the little girl dancing, paused for a second, and then turned away. Elise stood by the doorway, holding her breath, her heart beating wildly out of rhythm. Mrs. Pearl stood beside her, and when she saw that moment, tears spilled down her wrinkled cheeks. 14 months, she whispered, her voice breaking. 14 months since he's looked at anyone like that. Elise took her hand, trying to keep herself steady even as emotion surged through her. "This is only the beginning," she said softly. "We're still very far from the finish line." On the 4th day, Elise tried a new step forward. She sat beside Owen's chair and slowly took his small hand, so gently it was like holding a fragile petal. Owen didn't react, but he didn't pull away. "This is how we greet the sun," Elise said, and she began to draw a circle in the air, using Owen's hand. "Every morning when we wake, dancers do this, to tell the sun we're still here, still alive, still ready for a new day." Owen didn't move, his hand resting in Elise's like something lifeless. But he didn't withdraw, didn't tremble, didn't panic. Elise repeated the motion, one circle after another, because she knew healing had no shortcut, only patience and time. That night, Elise couldn't sleep. She went out into the garden, walked along the stone path between the rose bushes, breathing in the deep cold of late-night air. And she saw Kieran there too, standing beneath an ancient oak, smoking a cigar, his face tilted up toward a sky full of stars. They stood in silence for a long time, two strangers sharing the same night. Then Kieran spoke, his low voice carrying through the stillness. "Are you afraid? Being in the house of a man like me?" Elise thought before she answered, moonlight falling across her gaunt face, a face that still held its beauty. "I used to live with a monster wearing the mask of a good man," she said, calm, with a bitter edge underneath. At least you don't pretend to be someone else. You show the world exactly who you are. There's a strange kind of honesty in that. Kieran turned to look at her, a flicker of surprise in his gray eyes. Your ex-husband? Elise didn't answer directly. She only looked down at her hands, the fingers that had once floated across ballet stages, now roughened by 8 months on the street. Some scars can't be seen, she said quietly. But they hurt the most. Kieran didn't ask more. He understood. He had scars like that too. Scars Catherine had left when she died. Scars Owen carved deeper every time those gray eyes looked at him with fear. Thank you, he said after a long silence, for staying. Elise shook her head. Don't thank me yet. I haven't done anything. Kieran turned fully toward her, and for the first time Elise saw something warm slip into those cold gray eyes. You're wrong. Yesterday my son looked at you while you told your story. He listened. I know because I stood outside the door the entire time. It was the first time in 14 months he paid attention to anyone beyond his wheelchair and the window frame. On the 5th day, a painful step backward came. Kieran entered the room while Elise sat beside Owen, talking about famous dancers and glittering stages. He only wanted to see his son, wanted to witness the progress Mrs. Pearl had reported. But the moment Owen saw his father, the boy's eyes flew wide in panic. Inside Owen's mind, images crashed in like floodwater. Father holding mother, blood, so much blood. Mother not moving, father shouting, gunfire, crying, all of it blending into one endless nightmare. Owen pushed his wheelchair backward, his mouth open but making no sound, tears streaming down his cheeks, his body shaking uncontrollably. Elise rushed forward, wrapped her arms around him, her voice gentle as a lullaby. It's okay. It's okay. You're safe. No one will hurt you. You're safe. Owen buried his face against her shoulder, crying without sound, while Kieran stood there, his face white as paper. His son was afraid of him. He, a man who could kill hundreds of enemies without blinking, had become the terror inside his own child. He was no longer father. He was the reminder of that horrific night, the image tied to blood and death. Kieran backed out of the room on heavy feet, then leaned against the hallway wall and drove his fist into it until blood surfaced. Elise came out after Owen had calmed and fallen asleep from sheer exhaustion. She set a small hand on the man's shoulder as he trembled with pain. It's not your fault, she said, her voice firm. Owen needs time. He loves you. It's just that right now, in his head, love and fear are tangled together. He doesn't know how to pull them apart. Kieran looked at her, gray eyes full of agony, his voice hoarse. How do you know? Elise was silent for a moment, then answered, her voice light as breath, because I was like that too, loving someone, but being afraid every time you see them. It took me a long time to understand that fear doesn't mean the love is gone. It only means the heart needs time to heal. That night, Kieran sat beside Owen's bed as the boy slept. He didn't dare touch him, afraid of waking him, afraid of sending him into panic again. He only sat there in the dark, watching the angelic face of the child he loved more than his own life, and asking himself a question that had no answer. He could kill 100 men without blinking, could face the most dangerous enemies without a tremor in his hands. So why couldn't he hold his own son? 2 weeks passed, and the Blackwood estate began to change in ways no one would have dared to believe were real. Owen had grown used to Elise and Bee's presence, no longer shrinking back or panicking when they entered his room. Every morning, when the familiar footsteps sounded in the hallway, the boy turned his head toward the door, gray eyes no longer empty the way they'd been, but carrying something that looked almost like anticipation. He didn't stare into nothingness anymore. He watched Bee, followed every movement of the 5-year-old, from the way she bounced around the room to the way she grinned wide while babbling stories that made no sense. They were tiny steps, almost invisible to an outsider, but to anyone who had witnessed 14 months of Owen swallowed by darkness, they were thin beams of hope. One afternoon, Kieran called Elise into his office, wanting to understand more clearly what method she was using. Elise sat in the chair across from the heavy oak desk, where the Mafia boss usually sat to make decisions that meant life or death. But today, Kieran wasn't the king of darkness. He was only a father, desperate to understand how to save his child. When a mind is hit by trauma that's too massive, Elise began to explain, her voice gentle yet certain, as if she'd been thinking about this for a long time. It can freeze the body as a defense mechanism. It's how the brain protects us from pain we can't bear. Owen is stuck inside that horrific moment. He relives it every time there's a trigger, every time he sees something that reminds him of that night. Kieran frowned, gray eyes tight with worry. So how do we pull him out? Elise drew a deep breath before she went on. We can't heal a mind with words, especially not with children. But the body has its own memory, a kind of memory that doesn't need language. If we wake the body little by little, help it remember that it's still alive, still able to move, still able to feel joy, the mind will follow. I'm going to use motion, dance, but not by forcing Owen to dance. The goal is for him to feel that his body still exists, still works, still can be joyful. Kieran watched her closely, something like respect settling in his gaze. Where did you learn this? Elise looked down at her hands, her voice softening. I lived through it. After Troy, after what happened, I froze too. I didn't want to dance, didn't want to move, didn't want to do anything. Ballet brought me back, not because I wanted it to, but because my body remembered. It remembered what it felt like to fly, what it felt like to be free, and little by little, my mind remembered too. The next day, Owen's room was rearranged, the unnecessary toys carried out and replaced with a soft rug spread across the floor. Elise brought a small Bluetooth speaker and played a gentle piece of music, a familiar melody she often used to lull Bee to sleep. Owen, today we're going to play a new game, she said, cheerful but never forcing. It's called Dancing Without Feet. Bee hopped in excitement. Bee knows this game. Mommy taught Bee. She ran to Owen's wheelchair and took his hand without hesitation. Owen, play with Bee, okay? It's so fun. Elise began with the first stage, fingers. Bee held Owen's hand and taught him to snap his fingers with the beat, tiny, simple movements that demanded almost nothing. Snap, 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 Bee sang along. Like this, Owen. Then came stage 2, wrists. Bee rotated Owen's wrist gently, like ocean waves, like bird wings, soft natural motions. We're birds, Owen. We're flying. Stage 3, arms. Bee pulled Owen's arm to draw curves in the air, as if hugging the sky, as if reaching for clouds. See? We're hugging the whole world. Bee held both of Owen's hands and swayed with the music, giggling as if this were the best game on earth. You're doing so good, Owen. See? We're flying. And then the miracle happened. Owen moved, not passively, not only following Bee the way he had before, but actively. He lifted his arms up and down on his own, drew curves in the air on his own, gray eyes no longer hollow but lit with something that looked like life. Elise stopped breathing, hardly daring to trust what she was seeing. Mrs. Pearl stood in the doorway with her hand over her mouth, tears pouring down her face. Ronan, Kieran's toughest guard, stood there too, eyes reddened, turning his head away to hide what he felt. Bee kept going, unaware that a miracle was unfolding right in front of everyone. You're so good, Owen. Now we smile. She made silly faces, puffed her cheeks, stuck out her tongue, wrinkled her nose. The foolish little performances only a child can do without shame. And Owen, the 7-year-old boy who hadn't laughed for 14 months, the child who'd watched his mother get shot to death in front of him, the child frozen in pain and terror. Owen laughed. A small laugh, rough and hoarse from 14 months of not using his voice, but real. A laugh from deep inside. The laugh of a child slowly finding himself again. Elise cried, unable to stop, tears streaming down her cheeks while her mouth was smiling. Mrs. Pearl sobbed openly, gripping the wall so she wouldn't collapse, the whole room filled with tears and happiness. No one knew that Kieran had been standing in the corner since the beginning, hidden in the shadows, watching it all. When Owen laughed, Kieran's legs seemed to lose all strength, and he dropped to his knees on the floor, his body shaking with emotion. He crawled to the wheelchair, took his son's small hand, his voice breaking. Son, I'm here. I'm here. Owen looked at his father, and this time there was no fear in those gray eyes, only recognition, presence, as if the boy were truly seeing his father for the first time in 14 months. Then Owen's lips moved, his voice raw from disuse, but clear enough to be unmistakable. D-Dad. It was the first word Owen had spoken in 14 months. Kieran pulled his son into his arms and wept the way he hadn't allowed himself to weep, the tears the Mafia boss had thought he'd forgotten how to shed. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Kieran found Elise on the second-floor balcony. She stood there, looking up at a sky full of stars, reddish-brown hair lifting lightly in the night wind. "Thank you," Kieran said, his voice still hoarse from crying too much. "I don't know what else to say. Only, thank you." Elise turned and shook her head gently. Owen did that himself. "I only opened the door." He walked through it on his own 2 feet. Kieran looked at her in the moonlight, her reddish-brown hair glinting, her eyes bright as stars, her skin still pale from months of hunger but slowly recovering, her cheeks carrying a faint flush again. "You're beautiful," he said, then went still, startled by himself, surprised by the words that had slipped out. Elise blushed and turned away. "Don't say that." Kieran stepped closer by 1 step. "I'm not lying. I never do. That's my rule." Silence fell, broken only by wind moving through the oak branches and the heartbeat of 2 people standing close enough to hear each other breathe. They both knew something was changing between them, something beyond the original agreement, something dangerous and sweet at the same time. Kieran Blackwood hadn't felt anything but pain and hatred for 14 months since Catherine died. He'd believed his heart had died with his wife, believed he would never feel anything beyond grief again. But tonight, looking at the woman standing in moonlight, the woman who had brought laughter back to his son, he felt something else, something more dangerous than bullets or knives, stronger than power or money. Hope. And maybe something more than that. While the Blackwood estate was overflowing with joy over Owen's progress, in another corner of the house, Vivian Blackwood sat in her private room, eyes cold as ice, staring at a photograph of Elise that her private detective had just sent over. Vivian had never accepted defeat, never surrendered in any battle, and she saw Elise Morgan's presence in this house as a war she was determined to win. A street woman, a ragged drifter, had somehow bewitched her son? Impossible. Vivian didn't believe in miracles or love. She believed only in power and schemes. And if Elise Morgan could get close to Kieran that easily, then there had to be something rotten underneath. She'd hired a private investigator to dig deeper into Elise's past, and the result made her smile, sharp and cold. Elise Morgan had an outstanding warrant for child abduction, and the child she was accused of abducting was her own daughter. Her ex-husband, Troy Jennings, was hunting everywhere, offering a large reward for any information. "So she's running," Vivian murmured, fingers tapping a rhythm against the wooden tabletop. A fugitive, a criminal, living under the roof of the distinguished Blackwood family. Through the detective's network, Vivian found Troy Jennings's phone number, and without hesitating, she picked up the receiver and called. In a cheap motel room on the other side of the city, Troy Jennings sat on a sagging bed, eyes hollow from sleeplessness and lack of pills, beard grown in patchy stubble, hands shaking from the addiction tearing at him. He'd come to Chicago a week earlier, tearing through the city, questioning people, searching. But Elise and Bea had vanished like smoke. He knew they were here. He could feel it, but he couldn't find where. The phone rang, an unknown number, and Troy answered with a snarl. "Who is this?" A refined woman's voice came through the line. "Are you Troy Jennings? I know where your wife and child are." Troy snapped, fully awake, the craving shoved aside by the sudden thrill of a predator catching scent of prey. "Who are you?" Vivian didn't answer directly. "I'm someone who wants her out of my son's life. We want the same thing, Mr. Jennings. If you take her away, I'll give you the exact address." Troy laughed, a savage sound in the dim room. "Deal. I'll take both of them," Vivian added, her voice icy. "But you must promise. You'll only take them. You won't cause trouble in my house. I don't want my grandson affected." Troy nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "Fine. I promise." But the promise of an addict wasn't worth a cent, and Vivienne, for all her cleverness, didn't understand that. A few blocks from the Blackwood estate, inside a black van parked discreetly beneath a tree canopy, Declan Murphy watched the property through binoculars, tracking every movement. He was a mole, a man who'd worked for Kieran for 10 years while quietly nursing a grudge, because 5 years earlier Kieran had executed Declan's brother for betrayal. Declan had waited for revenge all those years, and now the chance had arrived in the form of Konstantin Drakos, a Greek mafia boss, Kieran Blackwood's sworn enemy. Declan lifted his phone and called Drakos. "Boss, there's movement. Blackwood brought a woman and her little girl into the house. It's been more than 2 weeks, and his son is getting better." On the other end, Konstantin Drakos frowned, his scarred face tightening with rage. "Better how?" Declan reported in a low voice. "I heard the kid laughed, talked. That woman is using some method to treat him. Draco slammed his hand onto the table, the sound cracking through the room. No. That boy has to live in misery forever. That's the price Blackwood pays for killing my brother. He thinks he can shoot Nikos and live peacefully after? Never. Declan waited for Dracos' anger to settle, then continued. There's more. That woman has an ex-husband hunting her, Troy Jennings. He's in Chicago now, searching like a madman. Dracos went quiet, his cunning mind working at full speed. Then he smiled, a cruel smile that made even his own men shiver. Interesting. Connect me with him. Chaos is opportunity. If I can't strike Blackwood directly, I'll let that deranged ex-husband become the inside man. When everything turns chaotic, I'll move in. Declan nodded. Understood, boss. I'll arrange it. Inside the estate, Elise was sitting in her room watching Bee sleep when the old phone she'd bought at a flea market suddenly vibrated. She picked it up, saw a message from an unknown number, and her heart seemed to stop as she read the words on the screen. I know where you are, Ellie. Soon. Elise went rigid, her hand trembling, the phone nearly slipping from her fingers. She knew it was Troy. Only he called her Ellie with that same threatening, possessive tone. He'd found her. But how? She'd been so careful, hidden inside the home of the most powerful Mafia boss in Chicago. And still he'd found her? Elise wanted to run to Kieran's room, to tell him everything, to beg for protection. But she stopped herself. If she caused trouble, if she dragged her chaotic past into this house, Kieran would throw her out. Owen needed her. The boy had only just begun to open up, only just laughed, only just called his father. Bee needed safety. She'd only just gotten a soft bed, real food, clean clothes. Elise couldn't lose everything because of Troy Jennings. She chose silence, deciding she would handle it alone, find a way to deal with it without burdening anyone. That night, Elise couldn't sleep. She checked Bee's door once, twice, then a third time, holding her breath each time, listening for any strange sound. She was walking down the hallway when she ran into Kieran, standing there in the dark gray eyes fixed on her. What's wrong? He asked, his voice low but filled with concern. Elise startled and forced her face into something normal. Nothing. Just a habit. I always check on Bee before I sleep. Kieran looked at her without blinking. He'd lived in the underworld long enough to know when someone was lying. Elise, if there's a problem, tell me. I can help. Elise looked away, unable to face the gray eyes that seemed to see straight through her. It's nothing. Good night. She hurried off, footsteps quick, leaving Kieran in the dark hallway, frowning after her. 3 wolves were circling a flock of sheep. Vivian, the mother-in-law who wanted Elise gone at any cost, to protect the family in her own twisted way. Troy, the violent ex-husband who wanted his property back, because in his eyes Elise and Bee were things that belonged to him. Dracos, the Greek Mafia boss who wanted to destroy Kieran through his son, who wanted his enemy to suffer forever. And Elise, the woman standing in the middle of it all, unaware that the storm had already begun to form. Dark clouds gathering on the horizon, ready to tear away everything she'd just built. A few days after the night Elise received Troy's threatening message. A reliable source in the underworld warned Kieran that there was a traitor inside the house. That information about the Blackwood estate was leaking to Constantine Dracos. Kieran ordered an investigation immediately, and the results stunned him, even though betrayal was something he'd long since learned to expect in his world. Declan Murphy, the man who'd been at his side for 10 years, the man he trusted with critical assignments, was the mole. Kieran's mind snapped back to 5 years earlier, when he'd uncovered Declan's brother selling information to an enemy, and he'd executed the man without hesitation under the laws of the underworld. He'd never imagined Declan, the same man who had knelt and sworn loyalty after his brother's death, had been quietly feeding a grudge all these years, waiting for the right moment to strike back. Kieran summoned Declan to the cellar, the underground room no one in the estate ever spoke about, the place where screams never reached the outside world. That night, Elise couldn't sleep, partly because Troy's message kept gnawing at her, partly because Bee had woken suddenly asking for milk. Elise went down to the kitchen but couldn't find any, and decided to look for Mrs. Pearl to ask. The estate was enormous, filled with long corridors and doors that all looked the same, and in the darkness Elise took a wrong turn. She was about to turn back when she heard a sound that didn't belong, a strangled scream rising from somewhere below. Her heart clenched. Survival instinct told her to walk away, but her feet moved toward the sound anyway. She went down a narrow staircase she'd never known existed, and at the bottom was an iron door left slightly ajar. warm yellow light spilling through the crack. Elise looked through the opening, and what she saw turned her blood to ice. Declan Murphy was strapped to a metal chair, his face smeared with blood, one eye swollen shut, lips split and raw, and standing in front of him was Kieran Blackwood, the man she'd begun to trust, the man who'd told her she was beautiful under moonlight, the man who'd cried when his son said Dad. But the man in that cellar wasn't the Kieran she knew. He held a pair of blood-stained pliers in his hand, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms speckled red, and his face was ice-cold, not angry, not disgusted, nothing at all, only the calm calculation of someone who'd done this too many times. "I'm asking you one last time," Kieran's voice carried, even and flat, as if he were asking about the weather. "What else have you given Dracos?" Declan sobbed and begged, his words twisted by pain. "Please, boss. I've told you everything. Please spare me. I'll do anything." Kieran didn't answer. He only bent down and continued. A scream ripped the air, echoing off the concrete, and Elise clapped a hand over her mouth to keep from screaming too. She turned and ran, up the stairs, down the halls, running as if the devil himself were at her heels, until she reached her room, slammed the door, and wrapped her arms around Bee, sleeping peacefully. Her body shook out of her control, the images in the cellar looping again and again inside her head. This is who he really is. A torturer, a killer, a monster. Elise had already run from one monster. She'd lost everything to escape Troy Jennings, and now she realized she was living in the house of another monster. This one didn't hit her, didn't humiliate her, but what he'd done to Declan down in that cellar was something she couldn't erase. She thought about fleeing that very night, scooping Bee into her arms and disappearing the way she had 8 months earlier. But then she thought about Owen, the boy who had only just laughed, only just said Dad, the child slowly recovering because of her and Bee. Without words, she'd promised him she would stay. And Bee, asleep in her arms, sleeping safely for the first time in months, in a soft bed, full and warm and protected. Could Elise steal all of that away from her? The next morning, Elise was in her room with Bee when Kieran appeared in the doorway. Elise flinched on instinct, pulled Bee tight against her chest, and Kieran stopped immediately. He understood at once, and something like pain flickered through his gray eyes. "You saw it," he said. Not a question, a statement. Elise didn't answer. She only held Bee tighter, as if her child were the only lifeline left. Kieran didn't come closer. He took the chair across from her instead, keeping a safe distance, giving her space. "I'm not going to justify it," he said, his voice low and exhausted. "That's who I am. That's the world I live in." Heavy silence filled the room, broken only by Bee's steady breathing as she slept in her mother's arms. Kieran went on, eyes locked on Elise. "Declan betrayed me. He gave information to Dracos, the man who killed my wife. That information could have led to Owen's death, to yours, to Bee's. I didn't have a choice." Elise swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "So you killed him?" Kieran shook his head. "Not yet. He's alive. But he will never betray anyone again." Elise understood what he meant, and she didn't know whether that made her feel better or worse. Not killing, but what he'd done might be worse than death. Kieran stood and moved toward the door, then stopped. "I understand if you want to leave," he said, calm as if speaking about the weather. But Elise noticed the faint tension in his shoulders. "I'll have someone take you somewhere safe. I'll clear the warrant like I promised. I'll give you money so you can start over. You don't owe me anything." Elise looked at him, the man standing with his back to her, gray eyes cold but waiting for her answer with a worry he was trying to hide. She thought of Troy, who'd hit her with a smile on his mouth, who'd said he loved her and then broke her bones, who'd brought her flowers and then smashed the vase against her head. And then she thought of Kieran, who tortured men, whose hands were stained with blood, but who had never lied to her, never pretended to be anyone else. "Have you ever hurt an innocent person?" Elise asked, her voice small but clear. Kieran turned back and met her eyes. "No." "Have you ever hurt women or children?" "Never." Elise drew a long breath, then made the decision she knew would change everything. "Then I'm staying. For Owen, and because I believe you'll keep your promise to protect us." Kieran looked at her, and in those cold gray eyes something shifted. A small flare of light, something like gratitude and surprise. "You're the strangest person I've ever met." Elise smiled faintly, her first smile since last night. "Maybe because I've seen enough monsters to tell the difference. And you, Kieran Blackwood. You might be a lot of things, but you're not the kind of monster I need to run from. Elise Morgan didn't run. Not because she wasn't afraid. She was. Afraid of the dark cellar. Afraid of the screams. Afraid of Kieran's bloodied hands. But she understood something many people never did. Darkness wasn't always the devil. Sometimes it was only armor, worn by souls that had been wounded too many times, had lost too much, had been forced to do what no one wanted to do in order to protect what they loved. And Kieran Blackwood, hands stained with blood, was still the only person standing between her and the nightmare called Troy Jennings. A month had passed since Elise and Bea first stepped into the Blackwood estate, and on his regular scheduled visit, Dr. Samuel Reeves, Chicago's leading pediatric neurologist, came to examine Owen. He was the physician who had followed the boy from the beginning, from the earliest days after the tragedy, the one who had ordered countless tests, tried every therapy modern medicine could offer, and still watched them all fail. Owen's medical file was thick, heavy with notes of defeat, and Dr. Reeves had nearly given up hope that the child would ever recover. But today, sitting in Kieran's office and listening to the reports of Owen's progress, he couldn't hide the skepticism on his face. "Mr. Blackwood, I respect every effort you've made, Doctor," Reeves said, with the careful politeness of an expert. "But psychological treatment for traumatized children requires trained specialists and strict scientific protocols, not a dancer." Kieran looked at him, cold gray eyes flashing with irritation. "Doctor, you tried for 14 months. 14 months of every medication, every test, every specialist. What was the result?" Owen didn't speak, didn't laugh, didn't respond to anyone. "She tried for 1 month. 1 month. And Owen laughed," he said, "Dad. He looked me in the eye without fear. How do you explain that?" Dr. Reeves fell silent, unable to argue. It was a fact he couldn't deny, and as a scientist he had to acknowledge the evidence. "Fine," he said at last. "Let me see a session." They went up to Owen's room, where Elise and Bea were already prepared. "Doctor," Reeves sat in the corner with notebook and pen in hand, watching with the eyes of a researcher. Elise spoke to Owen gently, her voice warm the way it always was. "Dr. Reeves is visiting today. He wants to see how good you are, okay?" And what made Dr. Reeves's eyes widen in astonishment happened immediately. Owen gave a small nod, a clear communicative response, an interaction the boy had not shown in the entire 14 months Dr. Reeves had observed him. The doctor hurried to write, his hand trembling slightly with emotion. The music began, soft and warm, the same song Elise had used throughout the therapy. Bea took Owen's hand and started their seated dance like always, movements that had become familiar to both children. And Owen, the 7-year-old who had once frozen inside pain, now moved freely, hands rising and falling with the beat, shoulders lifting, head swaying gently with the melody. He even hummed under his breath, a tiny sound without words, but sound nonetheless, life, proof that his spirit was waking. Dr. Reeves stopped writing. He only sat there, lips parted, unable to believe what he was witnessing. Elise knelt in front of Owen's wheelchair and looked into the boy's gray eyes with encouragement. "Owen, you're doing so well. Today, can we try something new?" Owen watched her, waiting, and in his gaze was a trust he had never given anyone before. "Try putting your feet on the floor," Elise said, her tone gentle but certain. "You don't have to stand, just feel the ground." Bea immediately jumped in, taking Owen's hand and grinning wide. Bea puts her feet down too. "We'll do it together. Don't be scared. Bea's here." Owen looked down at his legs that had not moved for 14 months, legs he believed had died with his mother on that horrific night. He trembled, hesitated, fear flickering in his eyes. But then Bea squeezed his hand. Elise laid a warm palm on his knee, and Owen lowered his feet. His small feet touched the cold wooden floor, and Owen's eyes flew open, amazed as if he'd just witnessed a miracle. "I can feel it," he blurted, his voice full of shock and emotion. "Cold. The floor is cold," Elise cried, tears streaming down her face while her smile shone bright. "That's right. You can feel it. Your legs are still here. They still work. They can still feel." Owen stared at his feet as if he were seeing them for the first time, as if they had been returned to him after a long disappearance. "Doctor." Reeves rose, stepped closer, and knelt to examine Owen's feet with the trembling hands of a doctor who had just seen the impossible. He touched the boy's foot lightly, tested reflexes, and his expression shifted from skepticism to pure astonishment. "I can't believe it," he whispered, his voice thick. "His neurological reflexes are completely normal. There's no physical damage at all. It's all psychological. All from the trauma." He turned to Elise, respect in his gaze. "How did you do it?" Elise wiped her tears and shook her head gently. "I didn't heal him. I only reminded him his body is still here, still alive, still able to feel joy. I only opened the door. He walked through it himself." "Doctor." Reeves went quiet for a moment, his scientific mind trying to explain what he'd just witnessed. "Neuroplasticity," he said at last, as if he'd found the answer. "Movement reactivates neural connections blocked by trauma. When the body begins to move, it sends signals back to the brain, telling it that things are still okay, still safe. You did what the textbooks describe, but by instinct instead of theory." He stood and looked at Elise with an entirely different expression than before. "Miss Morgan, I want to work with you. I'll combine gentle physical therapy with your approach, help the boy's muscles recover gradually. If this continues," he paused and drew a deep breath, "the boy may be able to walk." Kieran had been standing in the doorway the entire time, silently witnessing everything. When Dr. Reeves said the boy might walk, Kieran's legs nearly gave out. He stepped into the room, dropped to his knees beside his son's wheelchair, and wrapped Owen in his arms. "Did you hear that, Owen?" he said, voice breaking. "You're going to walk. You're going to run, play ball, climb trees, do anything you want." Owen looped his arms around his father's neck, gray eyes shining with hope. "Really, Dad? I'm really going to walk?" Kieran held him tighter, tears falling onto the boy's black hair. "Really, I promise." That night, the entire Blackwood estate seemed to glow, not from electric lights, but from the joy filling every corner. Mrs. Pearl prepared a small celebration, pastries and hot tea. Everyone gathered in the large living room. Ronan, the toughest of guards, wore a rare smile and even let Bee ride on his shoulders. Even Vivienne, who had opposed Elise from the start, said nothing cruel, only sat in a corner watching her grandson laugh, her expression complicated. Everyone believed the miracle was coming, that the darkness had passed, that the future would be brighter. No one knew the storm was coming too. Dark clouds already piled on the horizon, and it would break sooner than anyone could imagine. 3 days after that special therapy session with Dr. Reeves, everything inside the Blackwood estate seemed to be moving in the direction of a fairy tale. Owen kept making remarkable progress. He could place both feet on the floor with confidence now, and he was even beginning to find his balance for longer stretches each day. Every time Owen rose, even for the briefest instant, the whole room seemed to hold its breath, then break into applause and laughter. Bea and Owen grew closer by the day, as if they were siblings separated long ago. Bea always holding Owen's hand, always telling him ridiculous stories, always dancing until she wrung a smile out of him. And between Kieran and Elise there was something unspoken that they both felt. Looks that lingered longer than they needed to, fingers brushing by accident, silences that no longer felt uncomfortable but warm. But in another corner of the estate, Vivienne Blackwood was boiling in anger and desperation. She'd waited long enough, hoped Elise would leave on her own, believed her son would come to his senses. But no, the woman was still here, still taking up Kieran's attention, still becoming so essential to Owen that her grandson called for her before he called for Vivienne. It needed stronger action. Vivienne picked up the phone and called Troy Jennings, her voice cold and decisive. "Come to the estate at 3 this afternoon. I'll make sure security is careless. I'll create a gap for you to get in. Take her away." On the other end, Troy gave a short, ugly laugh, the laugh of an addict buzzing with the promise of satisfaction. "Fine. But what if she fights back?" Vivienne didn't hesitate. "Then you handle it. I don't care. I only care that she's out of my house." She hung up, never realizing she'd just opened the door for hell to walk in. At 3 that afternoon, Elise was in Owen's room with Bea, running their usual session. Dr. Reeves was there as well, watching and taking notes. He'd become a steady ally in Owen's healing. The music played softly. Bea held Owen's hand, the children were laughing, and Elise knelt beside them, guiding Owen and shifting his weight onto his legs. Everything was peaceful, almost perfect. Then the door flew open with a violent crash. Troy Jennings stormed in, eyes bloodshot, stinking of alcohol and sweat, his face twisted with rage and madness. "Ellie," he roared, his voice filling the room. I finally found you. Elise went completely still, blood draining from her face, her body locking as if someone had pressed pause. Her worst nightmare, her deepest fear, had become real right in front of her. Troy, she whispered, voice shaking. How did you get in here? Troy laughed, a savage sound in the suffocating tension. Someone opened the door for me. His gaze flicked toward the hallway, where Vivian stood in the distance, her polished face gone pale as she took in what Troy truly looked like. Not a wronged husband the way she'd imagined, but a deranged addict. Troy moved toward B, bloodshot eyes fixed on the little girl he considered his property. B, he barked. Daddy's girl. Come to Daddy. B screamed, a heartbreaking sound of pure terror, and ran behind Elise, clinging to her mother's legs. No, not Daddy. Mommy, Mommy. Elise stepped between her daughter and Troy, trembling, but forcing herself to stay steady, trying to shield B with her thin body. Troy, you need to leave. Right now. This isn't your place. Troy snarled, his face contorting with fury. You don't get to order me around. You're my wife. That kid is my kid. And you're coming home with me, whether you want to or not. He swung his hand and slapped Elise hard, the blow like a thunderclap. She fell to the floor, her lips splitting open, blood streaming down her chin. Doctor. Reeves tried to intervene, lunged and grabbed Troy's arm, but Troy shoved the older doctor down, his head striking the edge of the bed. And Owen, the 7-year-old in the wheelchair, saw everything. In Owen's mind, images began to stack on top of each other, past and present collapsing into one nightmare with no way out. Mother getting hit. No. Mother getting shot. Blood. So much blood. Screaming. Mother falling. Mother not moving. Wake up, Mom. 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 Owen screamed, a sound that tore through the room, the scream of a child reliving the worst moment of his life. He fell out of the wheelchair and curled on the floor, hands over his ears, eyes squeezed shut, body shaking beyond control. No. No. Mom. Mom, he howled. And he wasn't calling Elise. He was calling Catherine, living that night all over again. Owen's screaming echoed through the estate, and Kieran crashed into the room like a storm with Ronan right behind him. What he saw made his blood boil. Elise on the floor with blood on her mouth, B sobbing in the corner, Owen convulsing on the ground, and Troy, the bastard who had dared to step into Kieran's home, yanking B toward him. Kieran didn't say a word. He drove his fist straight into Troy's face with all the force of his fury. Troy went down, blood spurting from his nose, but Kieran didn't stop. He climbed onto him and kept punching, each blow thrown with a word through clenched teeth. You dared touch them. Ronan had to lunge in and haul Kieran back, using everything he had to restrain a boss who had turned feral. Boss, enough. The kid needs you. Kieran stopped, breathing hard. Troy's blood smeared across his hands. He turned, saw Owen shaking on the floor, and rushed to him, dropping to his knees. Owen, son, I'm here. But when Owen opened his eyes and saw his father, the boy screamed even harder. No, go away. Blood. There's blood. Kieran looked down at his hands, at the bright red smeared across his skin, and he understood. Owen saw blood on his father's hands. And in the boy's mind, that image collided with the memory of his father holding his mother drenched in blood on that fateful night. Kieran was the trigger. Kieran was the fear. Troy was dragged away and locked inside one of Kieran's hidden facilities, where he would pay for what he'd done. Owen was lifted back onto the bed, but he'd shut down completely again, worse than the beginning. No response, no eye contact, trembling when anyone came near. A month of careful building had turned to smoke. No, worse than that, they had fallen back behind the starting line. Doctor, Reeves shook his head, his face heavy with worry. He's re-traumatized. This time it's worse because there's a new trigger. The violence he witnessed today reinforced the fear, confirmed for his brain that the world isn't safe. Kieran went looking for Vivian, steps heavy as if carrying 1,000 pounds of rage. He found her in the living room, trembling in a chair, face paper white. What did you do? He thundered, his voice like a clap of thunder. Vivian shrank back, tears spilling. I only wanted her gone. I didn't think he'd be like that. I thought he was just a husband trying to get his wife and child back. I didn't know. I didn't think. Kieran slammed his hand down on the table, the crack echoing through the room. You didn't think? That bastard almost killed all three of them. Your grandson is lying in there worse than ever because of you. Because you wanted to throw an innocent woman out of this house. Do you understand what you've done?" Vivian broke into sobs, shoulders shaking. I'm sorry. I didn't want this." Kieran stared at his mother, gray eyes ice cold. "Get out of my sight, now. I don't want to look at you." That night, Elise sat by Owen's bed, watching him curl into sleep filled with nightmares. 1 month of building, 1 hour of destruction. She looked down at her hands that had tried to protect her daughter, tried to heal Owen, and yet had brought disaster into this house. Was it all her fault? Had she carried hell into someone else's heaven? If she'd never come here, Troy wouldn't have come. Owen wouldn't have been hurt again. Nothing would have shattered like this. Tears fell onto her fingers, and in the dark, Elise Morgan wondered if her very existence was a curse. 3 days had passed since Troy stormed in and destroyed everything, and the Blackwood estate sank into a heavy silence, like a house of mourning. Owen didn't improve. He got worse. The boy didn't just shut the outside world out. He rejected Elise and Bea too, screaming every time they entered his room, as if their presence itself were a reminder of the nightmare that had just happened. Elise was exhausted, dark circles carved beneath her eyes from sleeplessness, her mind spinning in a tight spiral of self-blame, self-punishment, wondering if she should leave to protect the people she loved from herself. Kieran was grim, spending most of his time in his office, handling business, interrogating Troy to find out who had helped him get into the house. But beneath the cold exterior, he was breaking apart as he watched his son sink back into the dark. No one knew that tonight, everything would change forever. Across the city, Konstantin Drakos had waited long enough. Through his spy network and information from Troy Jennings, the man his people had rescued from Kieran's holding facility just 2 days earlier, Drakos knew the moment had come. Blackwood was weakened, his household was in chaos, his son had just been re-traumatized, and the security system was slipping because everyone was focused on internal monitoring after the Vivian incident. Draco sat in a dark office, the ember of his cigar lighting the scars on his face as he gave his men an order. Kidnap the girl, the daughter of that woman. She's the perfect bait. Blackwood will come to save her, and we'll finish him once and for all. Dracos' team planned their night intrusion, exploiting a gap in the security system they had studied with care. At midnight, Elise woke to a strange sound. Something as light as a window opening, as soft as cautious footsteps. The instincts of a mother who had lived in fear for years snapped her upright, heart slamming out of rhythm. She ran to Bea's room, shoved the door open, and her heart stopped. The bed was empty. The window stood wide open, and on the pillow lay a scrap of paper with a scrawled message. "If you want to see your daughter, come to Warehouse 47, South Chicago Harbor, alone, or she dies. No police, no Blackwood." Elise shook, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't scream, didn't wake anyone. Inside her head there was only one thought: save Bea, at any cost, even if it meant trading her own life. She wrote a quick letter for Kieran and left it on the table in her room. "I'm sorry. I have to save Bea. Don't look for me. Take care of Owen. Thank you for everything." Then she slipped out of the estate through the back door, caught a taxi on the main road, and headed toward South Chicago Harbor, where her daughter was waiting, where her own grave might be waiting too. Early morning, Mrs. Pearl made her usual rounds and found Elise's room empty, the bed untouched. She found the letter, read it, and her scream cut through the estate. Boss, Miss Elise, and little Bea. Kieran ran in, snatched the letter, read, and his face went white as paper. Then blood surged into his cheeks, and his gray eyes ignited with a rage he rarely let anyone see. "Ronan!" he roared. "Mobilize everyone. South Chicago Harbor. Warehouse 47. Now." Ronan frowned, loyal and wary. "Boss, it could be a trap. Drakos might be waiting for us there." Kieran turned, eyes like burning coals. "I know it's a trap. I'm not an idiot. But she's there, and I'm not letting her die. We're going." Warehouse 47 was a decaying structure by the harbor, a place where darkness ruled even in daylight. Elise arrived alone, trembling, but she walked in without hesitation, because inside was Bea, her daughter, the only reason she was still alive. She shoved the rusted iron door and stepped inside, and she saw Bea. The child was tied to a wooden chair, eyes red from crying, mouth sealed with tape, but alive, breathing, looking at her mother with fear and hope. "B." Elise lunged forward, but a voice from the shadows made her stop short. "Don't move." Constantine Dracos stepped into the weak light from the dusty windows, his scarred face emerging like something carved from stone. And beside him, leaving Elise so shocked she could barely breathe, stood Troy Jennings, the man she believed was still locked inside Kieran's facility. "Troy," she whispered, horror filling her voice. "How are you here? How did you get out?" Troy laughed, the crazed laugh of a man who had lost his mind. "The Greek paid me, Ellie," Troy sneered, a twisted grin on his face. "His spies tracked Blackwood's mother's leak right to my cell 2 days ago. He wants Blackwood, I want you. Win-win. We both get what we want." Dracos moved closer, looking Elise up and down with cold detachment. "You're just bait, pretty Miss Morgan. Blackwood will come to save you, and when he comes, we end him. He killed my brother. Today, I collect that debt." Engines roared outside, then car doors slammed hard. Kieran had arrived, and he hadn't come alone. The warehouse door burst open, and Kieran charged in like a storm. Ronan and the guards behind him, all of them armed to the teeth. The gunfight erupted instantly. Chaos, gunshots cracking, screams, glass shattering, the thick stench of gunpowder. Elise crawled across the cold concrete toward B, trying to undo the ropes while bullets whined overhead. Dracos fired at Kieran, but Ronan lunged in, returned fire, forcing the Greek boss behind a concrete pillar. And in that chaos, Troy didn't care about the war. He only saw Elise. He rushed her, grabbed her by the hair, yanked her up, and pressed a gun to her head. "Stop!" he screamed, voice echoing through the warehouse. "Everyone stop, or I shoot this whore." Everything froze. Kieran stood about 10 meters away, gun in hand, but he didn't fire. Couldn't risk it with Troy's barrel pressed to Elise's temple. Troy dragged Elise backward toward the rear exit, a mad smile on his mouth. "You're coming with me, Ellie. You and B. We'll be a family again. Like before. You'll love me again." Elise choked on sobs, tears pouring. "Troy, please, let B go. She's innocent. I'll go with you. I promise. Just let B go," Kieran shouted from across the room. "No, Elise, don't. Don't go with him." Troy laughed and looked at Kieran with triumph. "Oh, looks like the Mafia boss has feelings for my wife. Interesting. Very interesting." And in the split second, Troy lost focus. Turning his head toward Kieran, Elise moved on instinct. She shoved him hard and stumbled free of his grasp. Troy went wild, his face twisting with fury, gun swinging toward Elise. "You dare!" he screamed, and pulled the trigger. Elise squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for death. But instead of a bullet tearing into her body, she felt a crushing weight slam into her and drive her to the floor. Kieran had lunged in, using his body as a shield. The bullet punched into his shoulder and ribs, blood spraying, spreading dark red across the concrete. He collapsed, falling on top of Elise, and she heard the pain rip out of his throat as a groan. "Kieran!" Elise screamed, the sound shredding her throat. Ronan reacted instantly, shooting Troy, one round into his leg, one into the hand holding the gun. Troy dropped, screaming in agony, the weapon skittering away. Ronan's team moved fast, overpowering Dracos and the remaining men, and the fight ended almost as quickly as it began. B was untied and flung herself into her mother's arms, sobbing, clinging as if Elise might vanish. But Elise couldn't hold her long. She dropped to her knees beside Kieran on the floor, blood soaking her clothes, hands shaking as she pressed hard against the wound to slow the bleeding. Kieran, open your eyes, please, open your eyes." Kieran's eyelids lifted, gray eyes weak but still searching for her. "B," he whispered, voice rough. "Safe?" "She's safe," Elise cried, tears spilling onto his face. "You saved us. You saved us. Why did you do it? Why did you jump in?" Kieran tried to smile, small and fragile but real. "Good, because you're family." His eyes closed, and the wail of an ambulance siren rose from far away. Closer, closer, closer. The bullet didn't kill Kieran Blackwood, but it shattered the last wall inside his heart. The wall he'd built after Catherine died. The wall that separated him from the world. And inside Elise's heart, in the smell of gunpowder and blood, in B's crying and the ambulance siren, she finally recognized the truth she'd been trying to deny for so long. She loved this man. A killer, a mafia boss, the man who had traded his own life to save hers. The intensive care unit at Chicago Memorial was flooded with cold white light and the steady, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor. Kieran Blackwood lay in the hospital bed, face drained of color, his body threaded with tubes and lines. But the worst was over. The bullet had gone through his shoulder and grazed his ribs, missing any vital organs by sheer luck. Yet he'd lost a great deal of blood and needed an emergency transfusion. The surgeon stepped out, pulled off his mask, and spoke to Ronan and Elise as they waited in the hallway. "He's a strong man. He'll make a full recovery, but he needs time, rest, and care." The surgery was a success. Elise heard it, and her legs seemed to give out. She dropped into a chair, tears streaming with relief. From that moment on, she didn't leave Kieran's room for a second, sitting by his bed, holding his cold hand as if afraid that if she let go, he would disappear. Mrs. Pearl brought Owen to the hospital the next afternoon, even though the boy was still withdrawn since Troy's intrusion. The housekeeper didn't know if it was the right decision, but she believed Owen needed to see his father, needed to know he was still alive. When Owen's wheelchair was pushed into the room, when the child saw his father lying there, covered in tubes, face wax pale, that powerful body now looking heartbreakingly fragile, something no one expected happened. Owen cried, not silent tears, but real crying, sobbing, wrenching, the first time he had cried since the day his mother died 14 months earlier. "Dad!" he screamed, voice hoarse from long disuse. "Don't, Dad. Don't be like Mom. Dad, Dad." Owen climbed out of the wheelchair, scrambled up onto the bed, and wrapped his small arms around his father, sobbing into Kieran's chest. And Kieran, weak and hurting, opened his eyes. Gray eyes found his son, and he lifted a hand, feeble but strong enough to hold Owen. "I'm not dying," he whispered, voice rough. "I promise. I'm not leaving you." Elise stood beside them, tears pouring, her heart breaking open at the sight. Mrs. Pearl cried aloud, clutching the wall so she wouldn't fall. Even Ronan, the hardest man in Kieran's crew, had to turn his face away, shoulders trembling slightly. After Owen finally calmed and fell asleep beside his father, Ronan gave Kieran the investigation report, his voice low and tight with strain. How did Dracos know the exact moment security would be weakest? How did Troy get into the estate that day? How did he escape the holding facility? The answer to all of it led back to one person, Vivienne Blackwood. She had contacted Troy and let him into the house the first time. And through Troy, Dracos obtained information about the estate's security, the family's schedule, everything he needed to plan the kidnapping. Vivienne's actions, born from her desire to drive Elise away, had indirectly led to everything that happened. Owen being re-traumatized, Bea being kidnapped, and Kieran nearly dying. Kieran listened, his face turning to ice, his gray eyes darkening. "Bring her here." Vivienne entered the room an hour later, her face swollen from crying, her steps unsteady. "Kieran," she began, voice choking. "My son. I'm sorry. I didn't know it would be like this. I didn't think." Kieran cut her off, his voice hard as steel. "You didn't know? You let an abuser into my home. You almost killed your grandson. Almost killed me." He stopped abruptly, swallowing the words he almost said next. "The woman I love." The truth nearly slipped out, and the weight of that sudden realization made Kieran's heart skip a beat. "Owen and Bea almost died because of you," he continued, forcing his voice back into steel. "I almost died because of you. You call that protecting the family?" Vivienne dropped to her knees on the hospital floor, tears pouring. "I only wanted to protect the family. I thought she was a threat. I didn't know Troy was like that. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Kieran looked at his mother, and in his gray eyes there was no blazing anger, only exhaustion and a deep, aching disappointment. "Protecting? You harmed this family. Get out. I need time. A lot of time." Vivienne stood, stumbled out, shoulders shaking, her sobs echoing down the hallway. That night, when Kieran was asleep under pain medication, Elise slipped into the hallway and sat alone on a cold plastic chair. She stared down at her hands, and even though she'd washed them again and again, she could still see Kieran's dried blood in every crease of her palm, beneath every nail. "It's all my fault." The thought drilled into her like a blade. If she'd never come to the Blackwood estate, Troy wouldn't have found them. Dracos wouldn't have had bait. Owen wouldn't have been hurt again. Kieran wouldn't have been shot. She was disaster. Wherever she went, she destroyed. Before, she'd ruined her own life, and now she was ruining the lives of the people she loved. Tears fell, but she made no sound. She'd forgotten how to cry out loud long ago, since the nights Troy beat her and she had to bite into a pillow so Bea wouldn't hear. Inside the hospital room, Owen still lay beside his father, refusing to leave no matter how Mrs. Pearl begged. Bea was allowed to stay, the child climbing onto the bed to lie on Kieran's other side. The two children clung to the wounded man as if afraid that if they let go, he would vanish the way Owen's mother had vanished. Owen looked at Bea over his sleeping father's body, his voice small but clear. "Bea, don't be scared. Dad won't die." Bea looked back, wide eyes still rimmed with tears. "Owen, are you not sad anymore?" Owen was quiet for a moment, then answered, his tone strangely thoughtful for a 7-year-old. "I'm still sad, but I don't want to lose anyone else." It was the longest sentence Owen had spoken in months, and it carried an entire world of grief and hope. Kieran Blackwood would live. Owen Blackwood was slowly opening again, the pain of losing his mother still there, but no longer imprisoning him in darkness forever. But Elise Morgan, the woman who had brought light into this house, was sinking into her own darkness. Sitting alone in the silent hospital corridor, she was thinking about what she believed was the only way to protect the people she loved, leaving, disappearing, so Kieran and Owen could live in peace without her haunted past, without Troy Jennings, without the disasters she seemed to drag behind her wherever she went. 3 days after the kidnapping, Kieran was more alert and recovering well, and the doctors allowed him to go home on the condition of absolute rest. But while everyone else was finally breathing again, Elise couldn't sleep. Every night she lay awake watching Bea sleep beside her, and in her mind there was only one thought, circling without end. Bea had almost died because of her. Owen had almost lost his father because of her. Kieran had almost lost his life because of her. She was disaster, a shadow. Wherever she went, suffering followed. She replayed everything, from the day she walked into the Blackwood estate with a fragile hope, to the day Troy arrived and shattered it all, to the night Bea was taken, and Kieran threw himself in front of a bullet for her. All of it shared one common denominator: her. If she stayed, Troy would find another way. Drakos would find another way. Kieran's enemies would always see her and Bea as weakness, as perfect bait. But if she left, there would be no bait, no weakness, and the Blackwood family would be safe. At midnight, when the estate had fallen fully asleep, Elise rose quietly and began to pack. She folded a few changes of clothing, the things she and Bea had owned before they ever came here, the old outfits Mrs. Pearl had meant to throw away, but Elise had kept out of the habit of someone who had lived too long in poverty. She looked around the room, the warmest room she had ever lived in, with its soft bed, thick blankets, a window opening to the flower garden, and memories both sweet and bitter. Tears came, but she wiped them away. She didn't have the right to cry. She was the one who had caused it all. She sat at the desk and wrote a letter with shaking hands. "Kieran, I'm sorry for leaving without telling you. I know you'll be angry, but I can't stay. I bring trouble. I almost made Owen lose his father. I almost got you killed. Bea and I will be okay. Don't look for me. Focus on Owen. He needs you. Thank you for everything, for showing me there are still good people in this world, even if you don't believe you're one of them. I won't forget you. Not ever. Elise." She set the letter on the pillow, looked at it one last time, then turned away. She slipped into Owen's room, where the boy was sleeping after days of exhaustion and fear for his father. Moonlight poured through the window, laying itself over the angelic face of a child who had learned to smile again, learned to speak again, because of her and Bea. Elise bent down, kissed Owen's forehead, and whispered through a broken throat, "I'm sorry, Owen. I can't stay. But I believe you'll walk. You're so strong. You'll run, you'll jump, you'll live a happy life. I'll always remember you." Owen stirred in his sleep, lips moving in a murmur, and Elise heard her own name. Elise. She clapped a hand over her mouth to keep from crying out loud, then backed out of the room, her heart tearing into pieces. She returned to her room, lifted Bea from the bed, and wrapped a warm blanket around her. Bea shifted, sleepy eyes half opening. "Mom, where are we going?" Elise whispered, forcing her voice to stay steady. "Somewhere else, sweetheart. Somewhere safer for everyone." Bea, still heavy with sleep, asked anyway, her voice full of worry, "What about Owen? What about Uncle Kieran?" Elise swallowed her tears and kissed her daughter's hair. They'll be okay. They have each other. Bea didn't ask more. She was too sleepy. And in her mother's arms, she felt safe no matter where they went. Elise slipped out through the back gate, the least guarded after everything, because most of the security was concentrated around Kieran in the main bedroom. She paused one last time and looked back at the Blackwood estate, the castle in the night, warm yellow light spilling from Kieran's room on the second floor. She stared at that light and imagined him asleep, healing, safe, without her beside him to bring trouble. Goodbye, she whispered to the house, to the man sleeping inside it, to the life she'd thought she might have. Then she turned her back and stepped into the night, holding Bea tight, never looking back. The next morning, Mrs. Pearl made her usual rounds. She knocked on Elise's door and heard nothing. She pushed it open and found the bed empty, the closet open, and a letter on the pillow. She read it, her face draining. Then she screamed, the sound echoing through the estate. Boss, Miss, Elise and little Bea are gone. Kieran, despite the doctors demanding rest, had insisted on an early discharge and returned home the night before. He heard Mrs. Pearl's cry, came down the stairs with bandages still wrapped around his wounds, and snatched the letter from her hands. He read it, his face turning pale. Then it flushed with anger. Then pain hit so hard he had to brace himself against the wall. Foolish, he whispered, his voice rough. She thinks she's a burden. She thinks leaving is protecting us. She is. He stopped, the rest of the sentence choking in his throat, but Ronan standing beside him understood. She is everything. Kieran lifted his head, gray eyes burning with determination. Find her. Turn all of Chicago upside down if you have to. Check every source, every camera, every lead. Find her for me. Elise Morgan had left. She believed it was the way to protect the people she loved, the only way they could be safe and happy. She didn't know that leaving would be the one thing that destroyed them most, the one thing that shattered Kieran's heart more deeply than the bullet ever had. And Kieran Blackwood, still aching from his wounds, forced himself to stand. He would find her, wherever she was, even if he had to go to the ends of the earth. For 2 days, Kieran didn't sleep. He sat in his office directing the search across Chicago, gray eyes locked on screens, streaming security cameras, one ear always pressed to his phone as he waited for updates from every street source he had. Ronan stood nearby, worry etched into his face as he watched the bandage on his boss's shoulder slowly stain red from too much movement. Boss, you need rest. The wound isn't healed. You're going to get sick if you keep this up. Kieran didn't even turn around, his voice cold and final. I'll rest when I find her. Until then, don't bring up rest to me again. Every resource was mobilized. Cameras across the city were combed through. The street information network was activated. Even the homeless were questioned with the promise of a generous reward for anyone who could provide information about a woman with auburn hair carrying a 5-year-old girl. At last, late on the second day, a report came in. Someone had seen Elise and Bea near Millennium Park, in a dark alley where the homeless often slept. Kieran got up immediately, didn't bother with a coat, didn't bother waiting for Ronan to arrange a full escort. He stormed out, climbed into the sleek black car, and drove like a madman toward the park, heart hammering with the fear that by the time he arrived, she would vanish again. Elise had returned to where it began, the shadowed alley near Millennium Park, the place she'd lived before she ever met Kieran. The place where she and Bea had once curled into themselves in the cold, waiting for a miracle. The miracle had come, and she had left it behind. Now she sat there, back against the familiar damp brick wall, Bea asleep in her arms, staring up at the night sky framed by a narrow slit between two buildings. No money, nowhere to go, no future, but at least the Blackwood family is safe. She told herself that, over and over like a prayer, even as her heart broke into pieces, even as every breath hurt when she thought of Kieran, of Owen, of the warm room she'd abandoned. Footsteps sounded in the alley, steady and decisive, and Elise looked up, survival instinct tightening her hold on Bea, ready to run. But the man standing there under the weak yellow streetlight wasn't a dangerous stranger. It was Kieran Blackwood. He looked worse than ever, face pale from sleeplessness and blood loss, deep shadows under his eyes, a coat thrown on carelessly over the shoulder bandage already seeping red, but his gray eyes still burned when they found her. Found you, he said, voice rough with exhaustion and emotion. Elise stood, holding Bea as the child shifted in her arms, and took a step back. You shouldn't be here. You need rest. Your wound. Who are you to decide that for me? Kieran moved closer, each step tugging pain from his injury. But he didn't care. Who are you to leave without asking me? Who are you to decide what's best for me? Elise backed up again until her spine hit the wall and there was nowhere left to go. I'm trouble, she said, voice shaking. I almost got you killed. I almost made Owen lose his father. Yes, Kieran roared, cutting her off, his voice echoing through the quiet alley. You almost got me killed. Yes. You bring trouble. Yes. But you're also the reason I want to live. Silence. Elise stared at him in shock, auburn brown eyes wide. Kieran drew a breath, forcing down the surge in his chest. 14 months, Elise. 14 months. I lived like a corpse. Working, killing, waiting to die. I wasn't afraid of death. I wanted it. I wanted to see Catherine again. I existed only because of Owen, but even Owen couldn't pull me out of the dark. Then you appeared, he continued, his voice softer but still fierce. Barefoot, ragged, hungry, saying you could save my son. You made Owen laugh. You made me laugh. You brought light into a place I thought would stay dark forever. You gave me a reason to wake up every morning, not just for Owen, but because I wanted to see you. And then you leave? Because you think you're a burden? Elise cried, tears pouring down her cheeks, her voice breaking. I'm scared. I'm scared I'll lose you the way I've lost everything I ever had. I'm scared I'll love you and then watch you die because of me. I can't survive that. Kieran stepped in and took her shoulders, gray eyes holding hers. You're not losing anything, because I won't allow it. I'm Kieran Blackwood, the devil of Chicago. No one takes what's mine, not even death. Elise gave a small laugh through her tears, the sound trembling in the dark alley. When you say it like that, it sounds like you're threatening me. Kieran smiled, his first smile in days, a smile that made the cold gray in his eyes turn strangely warm. Maybe I am. Then he dropped to his knees in front of her, ignoring the sharp pain in his wound, ignoring the filth of the alley floor against his knees. Elise Morgan, he said, voice low and honest. I'm not good with sweet words. I'm a killer. My hands are bloody. I don't deserve you. But I love you. I don't know when it happened. Maybe the first time you looked me in the eye and gave me conditions like I wasn't a Mafia boss. I love you. And I need you. Not because of Owen. Because I need you. Come back with me. Not as a guest. As family. As the woman I love. Elise sobbed, hands shaking as she covered her face. Do you mean it? You're not just saying it because you want me back to treat Owen? Kieran stood, took her hands, lowered them, and looked into her eyes. I don't lie. You know that. Bea stirred in Elise's arms and woke, and when she saw Kieran, her eyes lit up. Uncle Kieran, she cried, pure joy in her voice. You found Mom. You came to take us home, right? She slipped down, wrapped her arms around Kieran's leg, and he bent to lift her, holding her close. Kieran looked at Elise, gray eyes full of hope and waiting. Come home. Both of you. Elise looked at him, looked at Bea smiling in his arms, and she nodded, tears still falling. But these were happy tears. They stepped out of the alley, Kieran carrying Bea in one arm, his other hand gripping Elise's hand tight, heading toward the car waiting with Ronan beside it, the loyal guard's face openly relieved. Kieran, Elise whispered as they walked, her voice trembling. I love you too. I was scared to say it, scared to admit it, but I love you. I have for a long time. Kieran squeezed her hand, didn't turn, but she could hear the smile in his voice. I know. A woman doesn't sacrifice herself for a man she doesn't love, and you were ready to go with Troy to save me. Elise laughed softly and shook her head. You're too confident. Kieran's smile tilted, charming in a way that made her breath catch. I'm Kieran Blackwood. Confidence is my job. And in that dark alley, where they had first met when she was barefoot and ragged, and he was cold and distant, two wounded souls found each other again. This time, they didn't let go. This time, they understood they had found home. This time, they were family. 3 months had passed since the night Kieran found Elise in that dark alley, and everything had changed in a way no one would have dared to dream. Troy Jennings had been sentenced to a long prison term on a pile of charges: domestic violence, kidnapping, assault with a weapon, and most importantly, every false accusation against Elise had been wiped clean, completely erased, thanks to the best lawyers Kieran's money could buy. She wasn't a fugitive anymore. She was a vindicated victim, a brave mother who had protected her daughter from an abuser. Constantine Dracos had been handled in Kieran's way. No one knew exactly what happened to him. They only knew he was no longer a threat, and he never would be again. Vivienne had apologized more times than anyone could count. She came to visit every week, humble and remorseful, and little by little she was being welcomed back into the family she had nearly destroyed. And Owen, the 7-year-old boy who had frozen inside his pain, had made extraordinary progress. He could now walk across the room with only a light hand to steady him, his strength returning more each day. Elise had an idea, a formal ceremony for Owen to graduate from the wheelchair, to mark the moment he walked on his own 2 feet. The grand hall of the Blackwood estate was decorated lavishly, colorful balloons floating everywhere, fresh flowers arranged in crystal vases, and a large banner hung on the wall with bright letters that read, "Owen can do it." Everyone who mattered was there. Kieran standing at the far end of the hall with gray eyes glittering with hope. Mrs. Pearl beside him with a handkerchief ready in her hand. Ronan trying to keep his face stern, though everyone could see the corners of his mouth, fighting a smile. Dr. Reeves present as a special guest and medical ally, and even Vivienne there as well, standing quietly in a corner, not daring to come close, but needing to witness this moment. Elise placed Kieran at the end of the hall, about 10 meters away, then returned to the entrance where Owen sat in his wheelchair. His face was tight with tension, but his eyes were full of determination, his small hands gripping the chair's arms. Bea stood beside him, holding his hand, a bright smile on her mouth as if she had never doubted he could do it. "Owen," Elise said gently, kneeling to meet his eyes. "Today is a special day. You're going to walk to your dad. Not in the wheelchair, on your own legs." Owen swallowed, his voice trembling. "I'm scared. I'm scared I'll fall. I'm scared I can't do it." Bea squeezed his hand harder, her voice bursting with confidence. "Don't be scared. Bea's going with you. We're a team. Our team never loses." The music began, warm and familiar, the song that had carried them through every step of healing, the one Elise always played during therapy. Owen drew a deep breath, placed both hands on the wheelchair, and slowly stood. His legs shook, his knees wanted to buckle, but he stayed upright. He was standing. He was truly standing. Bea still held his hand, beaming. "First step, Owen," she said, thrilled. Owen took 1 step, then another, his legs still trembling, but he didn't fall. Bea laughed. "So good. Keep going. 3 steps, 4 steps." The whole room held its breath. No one daring to move, no one daring to make a sound, afraid that anything could shatter this fragile moment. Then Bea let go. "Now you go by yourself," she said, her voice full of trust. "You can do it. Bea believes in you." Owen stood alone, no hand holding him, no one bracing him. He looked toward the far end of the hall where Kieran had dropped to 1 knee, arms spread wide, gray eyes wet with emotion. "Come here, son," Kieran called, his voice breaking. "I'm here. I'll catch you. Come to me." Owen inhaled, and he walked. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. His legs shook, but he didn't fall. 4 steps, 5 steps, 6 steps, halfway, 7 steps, 8 steps. Owen began to cry, tears streaming down his cheeks, but he kept walking, kept moving forward, toward his father. "Dad," the boy called, voice choking. "Dad." "I'm here, son," Kieran shouted back, tears on his own face now. "Come to me. You're doing it. You're doing it." 9 steps, 10 steps, and Owen fell into Kieran's arms, clinging to him, sobbing. "Dad, I did it. I walked." Kieran held his son and cried like he'd never cried before, crying as if all the pain of the last 14 months was pouring out together with the burst of joy. "My son," he said, voice thick. "You did it. I'm so proud of you. I love you." Owen wrapped his arms around his father's neck, his face soaked with tears but smiling. "I miss Mom," he whispered. "I'll always miss Mom, but I don't want to be in the dark anymore. I want to live. I want to live with you, with Elise, with Bea." Bea ran over and jumped into the hug around both of them, her laughter ringing bright. "Owen can walk. Owen is so good. We're a team. Our team won." Elise stood there with tears streaming down her cheeks, but her smile was radiant. She looked at the boy she had helped heal, at the man she loved, at the daughter she had protected at any cost. and she knew every suffering, every sacrifice, had been worth it for this moment. Mrs. Pearl couldn't hold back her sobs, gripping the wall to stay standing. Ronan turned his face away, shoulders shaking, the hardest man in Kieran's crew finally unable to hide what he felt. Dr. Reeves nodded and smiled, his own eyes wet. "A miracle," he whispered. "There's no other word for this." Vivian stepped forward, hesitant, unsure if she would be welcomed. She dropped to her knees in front of Elise, eyes full of tears and regret. "My child," she said, voice trembling. "I'm sorry. I was wrong about you. I let pride and prejudice blind me. I almost destroyed everything. Almost destroyed the family you're building." Elise lifted her up, not letting her kneel, and smiled gently. "You're family," she said warmly. "And family forgives each other." Vivian cried and wrapped her arms around Elise, her shoulders shaking. "Thank you. Thank you for saving my grandson. Saving my son. Saving this whole family." Kieran carried both Owen and Bea and walked over to Elise, gray eyes shining with love and gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice low and warm. "Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for everything." Elise shook her head and smiled. "It wasn't me. It was love. It was Bea. It was you not letting go. It was Owen being strong enough to walk. Miracles don't come from one person. They come from all of us." Kieran set the children down, then pulled Elise into his arms, holding her tight as if afraid she might disappear. "I love you, Elise Morgan." Elise held him back, pressing her face into his chest. "I love you, Kieran Blackwood." And they kissed. In the middle of the applause and cheers of their family, in the laughter of Bea and Owen, in the happy tears of Mrs. Pearl and Vivian, miracles don't come from the sky. They don't come from luck or fate. They come from hands that hold on when they want to let go. From hearts that refuse to surrender when everything feels hopeless. From the unconditional love of a mother, a father, a 5-year-old child who believes her big brother can do anything. Today, Owen Blackwood walked. And today, a new family became whole. 6 months after the day Owen took his first steps, spring had returned to Chicago, and cherry blossoms were blooming across Millennium Park, laying a gentle blush of soft pink over everything. Kieran brought Elise to the park on a beautiful afternoon. Warm golden sunlight filtering through the leaves, a light breeze carrying the faint perfume of flowers. Elise didn't know why he'd brought her here. She only felt that something was different in the way Kieran held her hand, in the way his eyes watched her, in the meaningful silence that followed them the entire walk. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked, taking in the familiar scene. Kieran stopped beneath a cherry tree in full bloom and looked at her with gray eyes sparkling. "This is where you showed up for the first time, barefoot, ragged, and you said you could save my son." Elise smiled, remembering that moment as if it had happened in another lifetime. "I remember. I thought you'd throw me out, or arrest me." Kieran smiled back. "I almost did both." They laughed together, a soft, easy sound rising in the calm air. Then Kieran grew serious, gray eyes fixed on her with love and resolve. He dropped to one knee, pulled out a small black velvet box, opened it, and inside was a simple, elegant diamond ring catching the afternoon light. Elise lifted a hand to her mouth, her heart racing. "Elise Morgan," Kieran said, his voice low, warm, and true. 10 months ago, I was a man living in darkness. I thought my life was over. I was only existing, not living. Then you came, with bare feet, with your 5-year-old daughter, with a crazy promise that you could save my son. You saved Owen. You saved me. You showed me that light still exists, even in the darkest place. I don't deserve you. My hands are bloody. My past is full of sins. But I'll spend the rest of my life becoming more worthy, protecting you, loving you, making you happy. Elise Morgan, will you be my wife?" Elise cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. But these were happy tears, the tears of a woman who had survived too much pain and finally found real love. "Yes," she said, voice breaking. "Yes, I will." Kieran slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her alone. He rose, pulled her into his arms, and kissed her beneath the cherry blossoms, under a sunset turning gold. She said yes. A shout burst from the bushes nearby, and Owen and Bea sprang out, grinning wide, faces lit with excitement. Ronan stood behind them, trying and failing to look stern as the corners of his mouth kept lifting. It had all been carefully arranged, and the two children had been hiding there all afternoon, waiting for this moment. Bea threw her arms around her mother, eyes shining. Mom's going to be a princess. Uncle Kieran is the prince, and we're going to live in a castle forever. Owen hugged his dad, and now he could walk normally, even if he was sometimes still a little slow. Are you happy, Dad? You're smiling. You smile way more than you used to. Kieran lifted both children, one in each arm, and laughed bright and free. I'm the happiest man in the world. And their family held each other in the middle of the park, under cherry petals drifting on the breeze, beneath a sunset painting the whole sky red. The wedding was held in the garden of the Blackwood estate 1 month later. Simple but intimate, with only the people they truly loved and trusted. Ronan stood beside Kieran as best man, his expression serious but his eyes shining with joy. Mrs. Pearl served as the bride's matron, and she'd been crying since morning with no sign of stopping. Owen was the ring bearer, and what moved everyone most was that he walked to the altar on his own 2 feet. No wheelchair, no hand to guide him, steady and confident. Bea was the flower girl, and true to her nature, she didn't just scatter petals. She danced all the way down the aisle, twirling and bouncing until the guests couldn't help laughing. Vivienne, fully forgiven after months of remorse and making amends, stepped forward to place the Blackwood family heirloom necklace around Elise's neck, her voice trembling with emotion. "Welcome to the Blackwood family," she said. "I was wrong about you, but you gave me a second chance. I'll never forget that." Their vows were simple but deep. No flowery words, only truth from the very bottom of the heart. Kieran held Elise's hand and looked into her eyes. "I swear I'll protect you, love you, and stand beside you, in darkness and in light, in storms and in peace, until the end of my life." Elise held his hand tighter, her auburn brown eyes bright with tears. "I swear I'll be your light, your home. I won't run anymore. I'm here, with you, with Owen, with this family, forever." And they kissed, the first kiss as husband and wife, to the applause and cheering of everyone who loved them. After the wedding, the paperwork was completed, and Kieran Blackwood officially adopted Beatrice as his daughter. When the documents were signed, Bea looked at Kieran with wide, curious eyes. "What do I call you now?" Kieran smiled and knelt to her level. "You can call me anything you want. Uncle, Dad, or scary old man. Whatever you like." Bea grinned, not thinking for even a second. Dad Kieran, Bea likes Dad Kieran. Owen sat nearby, watching Bea with open curiosity. "So Bea is my little sister now, Dad." Kieran pulled both children into his arms. "That's right. Bea is your sister. You're her big brother. You two protect each other, take care of each other, love each other. That's what family means." Owen and Bea looked at each other, then hugged, giggling. "We're siblings now, from the streets to a palace, from loneliness to family, from darkness to light." Their journey hadn't been easy. It had been filled with tears and pain, with fear and sacrifice. But real happiness is never easy. It has to be fought for, protected, built day by day with love and patience. And they were ready to do that, together, as a family. 2 years after the wedding, Christmas Eve settled over the Blackwood estate, with white snow blanketing the garden and shimmering lights strung everywhere you looked. A towering tree stood in the center of the main hall, decorated by the family's own hands, from glittering ornaments to strands of rich gold tinsel, from the star on top that Owen had placed to the paper angels Bea had made herself. The air was thick with the scent of gingerbread and hot chocolate, braided together with lively conversation, easy laughter, and the soft drift of Christmas music. The long dining table was set in full splendor, crowded with traditional dishes Mrs. Pearl had spent the entire day preparing. Kieran sat at the head of the table, still carrying the unmistakable authority of a Mafia boss, but his gray eyes shimmered with happiness now, not the cold hardness they'd held 3 years earlier. Elise sat beside him, cradling baby James Blackwood, their 6-month-old son with his father's gray eyes and his mother's auburn hair. Owen, now 10, healthy and fast as any ordinary child, was arguing over turkey with Bea, the noise loud but warm with love. Bea, 8 years old and training professionally in ballet at a prestigious academy, giggled when she managed to snatch the drumstick right out of her brother's reach. Vivienne sat with the grandchildren, fully mended back into the family, a devoted grandmother now, attentive and tender. Mrs. Pearl, as always, cried whenever she looked at the family happy together. Ronan stood nearby, his expression as stern as ever, but everyone could see him slipping Bee extra mashed potatoes when he thought no one noticed. Dr. Reeves and his wife were there too. They'd become close friends of the family after Owen's long road back to life. Owen rose from his chair, holding a folded piece of paper, his face caught between nerves and pride. "I wrote this poem for the family," he said, his voice trembling just a little. "Mom, Elise said I should read it to everyone." The table went quiet, every eye turning toward him. Owen took a deep breath and began. "Family isn't a big house. It's where you get held when you're sad. It's Bee dancing every morning. It's Mom Elise singing lullabies. It's Baby James crying at 3 o'clock. The whole table laughed, and Baby James, as if he understood, babbled right along. Owen kept going, his voice growing steadier with every line. "It's Dad protecting us. It's Grandma telling stories. It's Mrs. Pearl cooking the best food. It's Uncle Ronan making a serious face, but sneaking me candy." Ronan cleared his throat and looked away, but everyone saw his ears turn red. "Family is us," Owen finished, looking around the table with pure love in his eyes. Everyone applauded. Vivian cried. Mrs. Pearl cried. Elise cried. And even Kieran lifted a hand to his eye when he thought no one was watching. "Owen," Elise said, her voice thick, "your poem is beautiful. I'm so proud of you." Owen smiled and ran to hug Mom Elise, then turned and hugged his dad. "I love everyone." Bee jumped up next, refusing to be outdone. "Bee wants to give a gift too," she announced, eyes shining. "Bee's going to dance Swan Lake, the one Mom used to dance." Elise froze, her heart tightening. She'd never danced Swan Lake in front of anyone again since Troy shattered her career, since the night he broke her ankle and stole the dream of her life. But Bee didn't know that. She only knew it was her mother's favorite ballet, and she wanted to dance it to make her mom happy. Bee began to dance. Innocent but beautiful movements, full of promise and fierce joy. She twirled, she rose and dipped. She lifted her arms like swan wings, and in her eyes was that same burning passion Elise recognized instantly, because she'd once carried that fire too. Elise cried. But this time it was happiness, the tears of a mother watching her own dream come alive again through her daughter. Her dream hadn't died. It had simply found a new shape in which to bloom. Kieran took his wife's hand and squeezed. "She's as good as her mom," he whispered. Elise smiled through tears. "She'll be better." Kieran stood and raised his glass of wine. "A short speech," he said, gray eyes moving around the table with love. "I'm not good at sweet words, but today is Christmas, so I'll try. 3 years ago, I lost everything. My wife died. My son couldn't walk. I lived in the dark, waiting for death to come take me. Then a barefoot woman showed up and said she could save my child. I thought she was crazy." He paused, looking at Elise with a gaze full of love. "Turns out I was the crazy one, because I almost let her go. Today I have a family. My wife, my 3 children, my mother, and the people I love. Merry Christmas. Cheers to family, and cheers to miracles." The whole table lifted their glasses. "Cheers to miracles." Elise stood, Baby James asleep in her arms. "Someone once asked me what the secret to healing is," she said, her voice gentle but strong. "I said it isn't the dance. The dance is only the bridge. What truly heals is love. It's not giving up. It's believing the light is always there, no matter how thick the darkness gets. I used to think I didn't deserve love. I used to think I was a burden. I used to want to disappear, but this family taught me that everyone deserves it. Everyone can be healed, as long as we don't give up." After dinner, the family gathered in the living room, dancing to a familiar melody drifting from an old speaker. Owen led Bee, both of them giggling, their steps still a little clumsy but full of joy. Kieran held Elise and Baby James and swayed gently to the music, gray eyes closed in happiness. Vivian sat in her chair clapping to the rhythm. Mrs. Pearl recorded videos, filming and crying at the same time. Ronan stood in the corner smiling, and for the first time a complete smile settled across his stern face. "People say life is like a ballet. Sometimes you fall, sometimes you fly, sometimes you think you can't go on. But I've learned it isn't about how many times you fall. It's about getting back up. And if you can't stand up alone, let the people who love you lift you." And they lived happily ever after. Not because life was perfect, it never is, but because they chose to love each other every day, every step, every dance. Elise and Kieran's story teaches us that love can heal every wound. That family isn't blood, but the people who choose to stand together through the storm. That no matter how thick the darkness gets, it can't erase the light of hope if we don't let go of each other's hands. In real life, maybe you're going through a hard season too. Maybe you feel lonely and lost. But remember, miracles don't come from the sky. They come from hands that keep holding tight, from hearts that refuse to surrender, from the love we give each other. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button and share this video to spread the message of love and healing to more people. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next emotional stories. We'd really love to hear how you feel. What did this story make you feel? Did it connect with your real life in any way? Please share with us in the comments below. We're always hoping to listen to your deepest thoughts. Wishing everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in every day. Thank you for staying with this story. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.